We could begin now.
Very good. First, I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you very much for joining this. I very much hope it's the last time we have to look at a screen rather than meeting in person. First, may we please just have a moment or two of silence, please, in memory of Nico Wilson, the committee member, who very sadly and tragically died on Monday. Our thoughts are very much with his wife and family. Thank you very much. Before we start, I'm asked to make an explanation, and this is as follows. To ask a question, please type the question into the question and answer section found at the bottom of the screen. The question will be read out by the Director North and answered by the relevant individual. And any voting will be done by answering the questions in the polls that will show at the relevant times on your screen. The minutes of the last annual general meeting held on the 29th of June have been circulated to all members and should be taken as read. We have a proposer and a seconder for these. Please, may I have the approval of the meeting that the minutes should be approved and signed? That's 100% yes. Thank you very much indeed. I shall sign them and return them to Naomi. Thank you. The next matter is the report of the branch chairman, Mr. Richard Murray Wells. Could the chairman please present his annual report, which has been circulated to the meeting?
Thank you, President of Yorkshire. We're lucky enough to have two presidents here today. My chairman's report's been circulated here, to which I would like to add only that I've been pleased to be involved with the appointment of Lucinda Douglas to the position of Regional Director. She has big boots to fill, following on from Dorothy, but I'm sure she will be up to the task. I'm very happy to take any questions on my report, as the President's explained how the Q&A work. And while waiting to see if any questions come in, I'd just like to mention a couple of points, if I may. I'd like to mention the recruitment of new members in Yorkshire remains very high, thanks to Dave Hill, who continues to be one of the most successful territory managers across the whole of the CLA. And if you have anyone in mind who you think would benefit from being a member of the CLA, please contact Dave with suggestions. I can think of no more important time to be a member. And a quick mention of thanks to, very well-deserved thanks to our superb team, both at the CLA, but particular emphasis today on those at CLA North, who've done an excellent job providing support and advice to members during the lockdown. And finally, I would like to express my thanks to our Yorkshire President, Lord Middleton, for this and all of his extensive work for the CLA. I know he's served on numerous committees, regional and national, and has seen action under the CLA banner, not just in Yorkshire and London, but across Europe. So my sincere thanks, and assuming there are no questions, that will conclude my report. Thank you.
Have we got any questions?
No.
No questions. Well, thank you for your kind words. It seems a long time ago since I first came on a committee. And I, again, would like to reiterate your thanks to all who've been working on our behalves, and to you, Richard, also. May I ask for the approval of the meeting for the adoption of the Chairman's annual report? That again has been unanimously supported. Thank you all very much. The next item is the election of a new president. And as you've heard, I've come to the end of my term, although I think I'm still on the committee, bad luck. But I'm going to be delighted that Charlie Forbes Adam takes over as the president. Charlie, you may know, he owns Escrick Park Estate, covering about 8,000 acres just below York. And it's been looked after and owned by the same family for 350 years. He's concentrated on a lot of diversification and offices and buildings and all the rest, and very successfully. He's also quite conservation-minded and green, and he has a natural nature reserve. May I have the approval of the meeting, please, for the proposal that Mr. Charles Forbes Adam be elected as your president, or our president? 100% yes, thank you very much indeed. We now go to branch committee. The following members have retired from the committee: Julia Rangecroft and Simon Roberts. I'd like to thank them for all they've done, especially Julia, who has been involved on the tax committee and very much an expert on taxation matters affecting us all. So thank you both of them. And the following members who retire under Rule 9B, having served for 5 years, have given notice of their intention to seek re-election: Andrew Cook, Philip Holt, myself, Tom Fawcett, and the Earl of Swinton. Could we have a proposer and second? We've got a proposer and a seconder, and may we have the approval of the meeting, or otherwise for these members to be re-elected, please? Again, 100% unanimous vote in favour of that. Thank you very much, everybody. No new members of the committee have been proposed, but please be aware that there are often spaces, and if you think people can contribute to the Yorkshire CLA branch, and indeed nationally eventually perhaps, please would you let Richard know, and Dorothy and her successor. We now go to the election of the branch representatives to council, and the following have been nominated to serve for the following year: Trevor Chater Norris, Jamie Saville, James Willoughby, and Christy York. May we please agree that they be renominated? Again, unanimous. Thank you very much for that. Right, we now get to any other business. Before that, I would like to add to the agenda, because Dorothy, of course, left it out, but I wanted to thank Dorothy very, very, very much for all she's done. in 22 years of service to the Yorkshire CLA, and then eventually to the North CLA, much to the chagrin of some of us who saw her duties being somewhat diluted northwards and westwards. But anyhow, Dorothy, thank you really very, very much. You've been a real pillar, and you've been here with us since 1998, I'm told. And I couldn't remember that far back, but anyhow, it's a long time and a long span of dedicated time of your life to us. And I very much hope you'll have a very long and happy and healthy retirement. So all the best for the future. And I think there's a party coming up, but you may or may not know about that. But thank you very much. And obviously great news that Lucinda Douglas is coming to take over from you. And I think you know her or met her. And you approve, so that's good news. So thank you with all my heart for all you've done, supporting me, keeping me on straight lines, and writing out all the agendas and everything else, and keeping us all right, really. And you've been a pillar, both nationally and in the north of England. Thank you very much. Is there any other?
Look, no, I need to respond.
No.
I would just like to say, that was very kind of you. Thank you. The reason it's possible to carry on working for the CLA for so long is that we deal with so many fascinating issues, and they keep changing, and so the work remains interesting. But the real and the constant pleasure of working for the CLA is the people we work with and the members that give so much time and support to the organisation, and the members who we help with their problems and things. And so they are what makes working for the CLA so worthwhile and enjoyable. So thank you to you all.
Well, thank you again. Is there any other business which due notice should have been given, but if we haven't been notified, perhaps we might take a question if there are anything urgent before the end of the AGM, formal AGM?
There are no questions been raised, so I think we should move quickly on and hear the National President.
I quite agree. We are very lucky to have with us, although sadly obviously not in person, but on the screen, our CLA President, Mark Bridgman. And I'd very much like to welcome him to Yorkshire from a distance. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say. And I think there's if you need to ask him a question, you have to do a bit of typing at the bottom of your screen, and the Director North will read it out, and whoever's going to answer it, hopefully Mark, will do so. So over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I very briefly would just also like to thank you for all the time that you've given to the association over many decades, including being Vice President of Europe and being on our Agricultural Committee and as President of Yorkshire. So big thank you from the CLA nationally. And also to your chair, Richard Murray-Wells, who is currently chairing our Agriculture and Land Use Committee and doing a fantastic job. So thank you. For those, just to add to my point on Dorothy, and such huge thanks, and there's a number of events, but I hope you've all got in your diary the 25th of June in the evening, where there will be information coming out about that. I'd just like to start really just to say, it seems like only yesterday that I was speaking to you this time last year, and we've been in sort of COVID restrictions for much of that time, and great shame that we're not all together. But I think the association has weathered itself extremely well through this very difficult 15-month period. Working from home has now become the norm. You'd be glad to hear that the offices are reopening this month. The London office will open, all things being equal, well, as long as we're allowed to, with the next easing of lockdown on June the 21st. And we will be back in the offices, which I, for one, am much looking forward to. But we have been able to be very effective. It's extraordinary how things have worked. In the last few weeks, I've been on 2 select committees with all the parliamentarians, all the MPs quizzing me on Zoom. My colleague, this was to do with Elms. My colleague, Mark Tufnell, Deputy President, was doing a select committee week before last on housing. We engaged the whole time. I'll talk later, but I was with the Department of Trade this morning for an hour talking about the Australian trade deal. So everything does continue. In many ways, actually, rather more effectively. You find that your diary is just completely chocker, hour in, hour out. Normally you do 2 meetings in the morning because you've got to go to different offices. Now you just have 60 seconds, if you're lucky, between one meeting and the next. So it has been an efficient use of time. And I think our engagement with members, I think we've done well. The regional teams are nationally engaging with members online. Where it's been difficult, obviously, is on recruitment. The territory managers not being able to get out and do recruitment face-to-face. So that has been tricky. But broadly, the Finances Association are in very good shape because inevitably there's a lot of costs haven't been incurred, lack of travel, offices being closed. So you'd be pleased to hear that the finances are in good shape. And the details will be in I think the next magazine or next but one. And so that is good news. As far as the advice that we've been able to provide over this period, I think that has been working well. The regional teams, the North and all the other regions have been working really hard to reach out, particularly to those members that we don't particularly have a lot of contact with. The engaged members who are on our committees or speak to the teams and come to events, we know well. But there's a whole swathe of members that we don't really know well, and we've made a real conscious effort over the last 15 months to identify those and proactively get in touch. And that is really important. And I think that has been bared fruit. But we've also put on, obviously, a lot of events. At the moment, for example, we'll be doing some events around natural capital. And we've done a whole series of events. Our big flagship conference, which obviously had to be cancelled in November, we did it online over a week. And we had 1,100 people engage with that over that week. And we had 3 government ministers and a whole range of interesting speakers. And I'm sure many of you will have engaged with that. But we have been able to keep very engaged through this very difficult process. Your chairman mentioned that it's never been a more important time for people to be members. And I think as I move on to talk about policy, and the work that we're doing, I think I would just reiterate that point. I remember when I started on the policy committee in London about 8 years ago, the sort of big things we were talking about were way-leave agreements for electric poles and where they would move to. And we'd wait every 6 years for the CAP reforms to take place. But there weren't the big issues that we're facing now. And right now, there's just so much so much change coming at us, lots of opportunities, but also lots of risks. We've got the very obvious coming out of Europe, the end of the CAP, and the transition, the agricultural transition plan, as the government calls it, to the future schemes, which Elms will be at the core of. We've got the move to net zero and everything that means for the whole economy. We've got free trade. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. We've got all sorts of pressures on our housing stock, particularly our existing housing stock, and that's obviously linked to net zero. And then we've got the challenges of taxation and how on earth we're going to pay for the huge bill that's been incurred to keep the economy going through COVID. So I think there's never has been more important time really for the CLA to act on yours and my behalf as members. So just turning to some of those points in a little bit more detail, and please do think of the tricky questions or the questions you'd like answered or things that you think we're not doing enough of, and put them in the Q&A in the Q&A button at the bottom. But if we turn first to the new agricultural plan. We know The government came out with their agricultural transition plan paper last November. It was very late. We've been pushing for it, and obviously lots of excuses around COVID. But really, it came out 4 weeks before the start of BPS being cut. And what it really highlighted is it made very clear the bad news, the move away from BPS over a 7-year period. And we all know what that means to our own individual businesses' profitability. But, you know, 2/3 of pure farming business, 2/3, 3/4 of people's pure farming businesses are unprofitable without BPS. But where the opportunities are somewhat less clear. And the picture is very complex. Susan Twining, our head of land use, counted up 18 different schemes. If you include some of the legacy schemes, you know, the HLS and countryside stewardship, the schemes that are currently available, and this whole wave of new things are going to be coming at us over the next few years. It's a very complex picture. And that's speaking from someone who's looking at it day to day and in meetings day to day. So for the average farmer who is out working their business, it is a very daunting picture, and that's really important that we need to help people through that. It's been made more complex by the introduction of this thing called SFI, which you'll have heard of, and that has really come about where we and others have been putting pressure on government last year, saying you can't take away BPS dramatically and leave what I term the valley of death between BPS going away and new opportunities. And so they've come up with this concept of fast tracking the early bits of ELMS in SFI. SFI stands for Sustainable Farming Incentive. And they're going to start piloting it this year with probably 1,000 farms. But for all of us, it will be available. The first parts of that will start being available next year. But we haven't got the details on it. And that is a theme. The lack of detail is a theme across the whole picture. And it's what I talked about in a virtual parliament 2 weeks ago. Because all of us trying to plan for our businesses, these are 3 to 5 year planning cycles, whether it's crops, whether it's livestock. So we continue to put pressure on that point. What I would say is, you know, how can you individually start preparing? You need to, my advice would be, if you're not already in stewardship at the moment, make sure you engage with that and make the most of that, because as funds get taken away from BPS, there will be more available for stewardship, and you may well already be doing stewardship. Also, I think start looking at I know it's jargon, but what your natural capital is. And what I mean by that is, what are the assets that you have that you think the government wants to support, those in our public funds for public goods, you know, whether it's watercourses, whether it's your hedgerows, whether it's improving your soils, because that's where the ELMS will be coming. And next year, you'll start to see just the first elements of that being introduced. And over the next 3 years, they're going to be more and more. So there are going to be a number of standards, they're called, probably 13 in total. Now, not every one of them will be applicable to each of us, because if you're on low ground like me, you won't be able to apply for the upland standard, obviously. But you might be able to apply for something for your grassland, for your arable, for your hedges, for your woods, a whole range of them. And then the full scheme will become available in late 24. The reason the government are pushing ahead with this is they really are very keen that they get the system up and running and started by the end of 24 when the next election comes. Because they've committed that the same total funding will go into the sector between now and the end of 24 and the end of this parliament. Obviously, they can't make a funding commitment beyond this parliament. So what are we doing? We're involved in a whole range of levels with government, trying to bring sense to the process, make sure it works on the ground, and that is a big task. And we're involved in a number of what they call test and trials, where we're testing out concepts, where government have commissioned us to do things, and then feeding that back in. So that's a little bit about the agricultural transition, and please do ask questions in a moment. On net zero, I think, this clearly is going to involve all of us in all of our lives, but no more so than in rural businesses. The Climate Change Committee has got some extremely ambitious plans about how land use will change, whether it's tree planting rates, whether it's energy crops, whether it's change in meat consumption. And that has all been agreed, has been supported by the government. The Secretary of State made a very big, important speech at the beginning of last week, which you may well have seen, and you can find it on the internet if not, all about nature recovery. And this links into climate change as well, because what the government are looking to achieve is not just a reduction in carbon, but also a halting of the decline in biodiversity. And you will hear more about this year. They're making a commitment that they want to halt that decline by the end of 2030. If you like, it's the net zero for nature. And they want to start measuring what they term species abundance, is how species, and you're going to look at like 600. So it's not just, the obvious, the curlew or the corn bunting, but it's the worms in the ground and the insects and the beetles, how they're going to measure that species abundance. And how they're going to achieve that is using elms to do that. But also they're very, their tree action plan, which was announced, and you'll have read about the peatland action plan possibly last week. On trees, we've been waiting that for some time. There's going to be a significant, they've got these very ambitious targets, and they're going to really turn the dial up on the payment rates that they're going to provide to us as land managers to incentivize to plant trees. And that's not just about big blocks of trees, it's about riparian planting, it's about trees in hedgerows, it's around shelter belts and little corner coppices. And it will be a more sophisticated with different levels of payments depending on what you're doing. But the other way that net zero is going to really affect us is around our housing. And there's going to be real pressure. We've been feeding back to government. They've been consulting us on this about how they decarbonize our housing. And we know we've already had to get to an EPC of E, which in itself has been challenging on many rural properties. But the target they're now consulting on is that we need to get to a C, which for those of us with properties that are off the grid, that are pre 1920s, where so solid wall insulation, it makes it very, very tricky. And so we are feeding into government the shortcomings in the system and the shortcomings in the way EPCs are measured, that they're simply not fit for purpose. They're designed around energy consumption, not around energy efficiency. And the other element, of course, around carbon is the fact that the grid simply isn't really fit for purpose now, because to get to net zero, it is really an electric economy. It's electric cars, electric transport, it's electric heating through heat pumps, it's renewable electricity, which is generated locally. And so there's going to have to be a huge investment in the electric backbone of the economy, but also how we plug into that. But I do see there will be opportunities for us as land managers through this process. So what can we each do in our own businesses? I'd encourage you to start, use one of these carbon calculator tools to start thinking about it. I got one of my sons during lockdown last year to crunch the numbers, and it's very interesting to see where, what it is in your business that is the big positives and the big negatives. So we do need to start thinking about it. We've been discussing it a lot in our policy meetings that Richard will know all about. And one of the interesting things that I think that's come out of it is we also have to be careful. We all think, oh, well, carbon, we can lock carbon up and we can sell it. So it's a great opportunity. My one caution on that is don't sell the crown jewels, because we've already got a couple of supermarkets saying we're going to supply you, the consumer, we're going to be net zero, and we're going to buy from farms that are net zero. So if I'm a farmer and I've sold all my carbon, then I might struggle to get to net zero. And then what does that mean? Can I actually then sell to Morrison's? So we need to think quite carefully about this and make sure we get our own house in order before we take the first offer of some money for carbon. And linked to that, what's the right price? Is it 10 to 20 quid where it's sitting at the moment, or is it 100 quid? I vouch that in 5–10 years time, it'll be nearer 100 quid than 10 quid. If we really are going to go on this journey to net zero, which the world is committed to. The last policy thing I thought I'd talk on, just because it's very live and interesting, is around trade and free trade deals. You'll have read in the papers the pending deal that the government are trying to do with Australia. We've been lobbied by both Department of International Trade, Liz Truss's department, and also DEFRA, where there's some differences of opinion, I think it'd be safe to say, and we've all read over the weekend what was going on in the cabinet meeting at the end of last week, where DIT seemed to have got the upper hand. I think we have to be careful when we're talking about it to see that it is more nuanced. I think to be pro-free trade is not to be anti-farming, and to be pro-farming is not anti-free trade. I don't think we should see that two things are not. I think as a country, we need to see where our exporting opportunities are. We have got a fantastic brand as a country, and in certain products, we've certainly got a quality offer, and in some products we are price competitive. In a lot of products, we're not particularly price competitive. But I think what's crucial is that we push government. And I mentioned I had this very interesting call meeting this morning with the senior people at DIT who are working on this, really driving home the important things around the safeguards and around the checks and balances that they need to put in place to reassure us as the sort of farming sector and primary producers, and how they will reinforce the standards that they've said emphatically that they will not allow to slip, and that they won't allow us to be competing on an level playing field. But there will be opportunities. One of the opportunities that government insists on is that by having a free trade deal with Australia, it will open up opportunities in that Asia Pacific region, which obviously is where all the growth is, particularly for sort of premium products. So those are just a few ideas of some of the things that we're working on nationally: agricultural transition, net zero, and trade. There's three big areas, and there's lots of other things that we're working on around access, which has been a big issue during climate change, and planning as well. But for the sake of time, I think I will pause there and open it up to questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Could anybody put any questions forward that they can? And I think we take note of all the hard work you're doing, and it is indeed a very complicated, large picture. So I think people can type in their questions, please.
Yes. So, President, do you want to just answer the questions yourself?
Sure.
So the people attending can't actually see these questions.
So yeah, okay. So the first question is from ATP. With reductions of land in countryside stewardship due to natural inlands intransigence, I think this person has got a particular view on this, surely not all 3 billion will be spent in the next 3 years as BPS cuts apply. Well, that's a very good question. So countryside stewardship will not take up all the running. So by the end of 24, they will have cut roughly half of BPS, and that money will go all back into the same pot, but it'll go into, yes, a bit into more CS, but it'll also go into the pilots. It will go into SFI that I mentioned. So SFI will crank up over the next 3 years. So I would expect, on average, the average farmer will be receiving a chunk of their, if you had £100 in BPS last year, you're going to have £50 by the end of 24. I expect a chunk of that you will be getting back through SFI on average. So that's where a bit of money part of the money will go. It will also go into these productivity grants that are going to come forward. And they will be a combination of two things. One will be the sort of stuff that we're used to already, the sort of up to 25, 30,000 shopping list, you buy it, and there's a price, and they're roughly contributing 40% to the cost. But then there'll also be a new scheme that they're going to start later this year, which is for a bigger scheme, which is the sort of, is it 50 up to 250 or 30 up to 3? Anyway, a much bigger scheme. So money into productivity, money into the sort of early parts of ELMS, and there'll also be the exit scheme. So anyone who wanting to take the exit scheme will be able to take it. On CS, what I would say is someone who's just sent in their rather ambitious CS application for this year, because my HLS finished, is that what I'm hearing is CS applications are up quite a lot this year. I blimmin' well hope they've got the money to fund them, but personally. I think a lot of people are seeing, direction of travel and, making the most of CS applications. Certainly that's what I'm hearing locally amongst my sort of farming friends. So that's that answer to that question. So the next one is from Helen Rhodes, which is quite a long question, so I'll read it out because I haven't read it yet. Has there been any further development suggestions from the government regarding proposed public access elements of ELMS and how that will relate to biodiversity? Is it one or the other, or is it likely that we are going to have to provide both? I'm thinking here, sorry, it's just moving. I'm thinking here of land with high population pressures right to roam. Well, there's two questions there, which is the sort of the tension between nature and access, and the question about payment for access through ELM. So if I just take the two things separately, but obviously are linked. It looks like encouraging access, encouraging engagement with the public is on the face of the Agricultural Act, as it is now called. And what that will mean is, if you think of the sort of three elements of ELMS, they were called Tier 1, 2 and 3. It's now SFI, local nature recovery, and landscape recovery. They're the three schemes. In each of them, I think there will be an access element. So what does that mean? In SFI, I know this because we're helping advise them on what it might look like. There may well be a standard for access, which might pay you or me to, I don't know, to improve the kissing gates, or the network of public rights of way on our farms, or give permissive access. So there may be something in an SFI standard that will be quite basic. At the other extreme, in landscape recovery, where they're doing really big projects, they've said this as they look at them, and they're just going to start piloting this year. Access and how you engage with the public will be one of the ways they'll score it, because it'll be competitive. I might be doing something with my neighbours over 5,000 acres, and you might be doing something down in Yorkshire, and they're going to have to score these. And if I'm doing something really brilliant to engage with the public, that will score well. So that's how I think it will be at that level. As far as the playoff between biodiversity and access, I couldn't agree with you more. And it sounds as if you may be, close to high population density. I think I know, Helen. I think you are, and it's a big issue, and it's why we are spending a lot of time pushing back on this whole. There's this sort of, the right to roam, opening up access. Wouldn't it be great if everyone could go walk up every river? It would be a disaster for biodiversity. Nature recovery means making space for nature is the jargon that the government and Tony Juniper of Natural England talk about. Making space for nature means giving nature space, means leaving nature alone. And so it is really important that we really keep driving that message home. And I think we've got the sensible environmentalists on our side on that point, because they understand that if people walk all over and their dogs rake all over nature bird reserves, not much good for ground nesting birds. That's a rather long-winded answer. I hope that's answered that. So next one is Stephen Ramsden. What about environmental stewardship, ES, HLS, or do the same rules apply as CS? I'm not quite sure what this question is getting at. So apologies, I'm not quite sure. Stephen, if you'd like to sort of phrase what it is you're trying to, what the question is that you're getting at. I mean, just on HLS, they are still doing those rollovers. So you can get a 1-year extension, and I'm not sure how long, whether they'll keep allowing that all the way through till 24, just to keep it simple, or not. But I probably haven't answered your question because it's not particularly. Oh, so here we go. I'm sorry, Stephen, you've got another one here. A number of us have been trying to lengthen our ES agreements, non-SSSIs, but have been declined because we refuse to give up moorland burning. Can CLA do anything to change natural England's decision? The honest answer is I think that is unlikely. If you see the peatland recovery plan that was announced last week, moorland burning hasn't been ruled out, but they are tightening up on it. It's a whole different discussion. But if your CS is around that, there are change. What you're allowed to do is being tightened up significantly. So I don't think it's unlikely that. I think it's very unlikely that will be unchanged. So my personal suggestion, without having any idea of your particular circumstances, would be to look at CS short term and make the most of that. John Henderson asks, no mention of hydrogen in net zero. Seems to be gaining traction as practicalities and as practically and commercially possible. Government seems fixed on electric, but I'll have a bet that it will not be the total result. Only snag is I shan't live long enough to see it. Well, John, I'm sure you're wrong there on the latter point. Hydrogen, I'm no expert here, but just what I've read, they're doing some trials, and they're using it in vehicles, and they're looking at it in housing. My understanding is that for existing housing, it will be potentially be a combination of both electric, so through heat pumps, ground source, air source, and hydrogen. The opportunity, of course, is if we're not putting, and I think, and this once again, this is slightly beyond my pay grade, if we're not putting gas down the grid network, we can put hydrogen down it, and that is the opportunity. But I don't think they haven't really cracked the technology completely yet to do this on scale, as I understand it. But it's the government believe it is a real serious option, and they're putting some serious money behind hydrogen. So I think I've gone through those questions. But please do, anybody else, if they've got any questions, pop them in the Q&A at the bottom. Richard or Nick, anything I haven't?
I think you've explained a very complicated situation, and thank you very much indeed for taking it all on board and understanding it and representing it. And on the housing side, it's obviously of great concern to those of us who let any housing at all, is why is only the letting part being hammered on EPCs? What about the private individual, 70% or whatever of the householders? And we think this is grossly unfair, and I'm sure you've brought the point up to others. Yeah.
And you're well represented by your son on one of our committees, who's made these points very eloquently. So it's a very interesting point, the EPC on private dwellings, because, as you rightly say, at the moment, I can have an incredibly thermally inefficient house, as I happen to do have, but I have to make sure all my tenant houses are very thermally efficient. the thing the government is consulting on is that will actually now be extended to all residents. And that's where it'll become very interesting, because the government are very happy to bash landlords, but once it applies to every single owner-occupier, it will become a much bigger political issue. And therefore, some of the things that we've been highlighting, some of the problems, we'll have a lot more firepower behind us, because we'll have everybody who owns a Victorian cottage in rural Britain will be on the same page as us. So it is coming, because it's utterly ludicrous to think that it's only a problem. And the background to this is that EPCs originally, it was about fuel, it was about addressing fuel poverty, that we weren't renting houses incredibly thermally inefficient and people were having to pay a fortune to keep warm. And that it was about, and EPCs is a measurement of the cost of the fuel. So if you put in an efficient gas boiler, your EPCs goes down. It's nothing to do with the carbon impact. And obviously, the pendulum is swung now away from the focus on the fuel poverty issue towards the carbon impact. And that's where we need to get the change in thinking.
Yeah, good. Well, is there anything else anybody else would like to bring up? Dorothy or Richard or Mark?
No, there are no more questions.
Well, Mark, thank you very, very much for joining us. And I'd like to thank all those who've joined us on the television screen that I can't see, or who don't know who everybody is or can't see them. But thank you very much for participating. And next year, surely we shall meet in person again. And again, Mark, thank you very much for all you've done and are doing. And again, I can't thank Dorothy enough for what she's done. So that's it, I think. We'll close the meeting. Thank you all very much.